candle, here we go again. Today I'm going to be making a 2-part silicone mold of this. It's a porcelain insulator for high voltages. I have some steampunk and Dr. Frankenstein type projects coming up, and being able to replicate this cheaply and easily will come in very handy. I'm going to start by building a box around the insulator with this foam board. Normally I would build a box and use clay to fill in the gaps around the mold subject. I tried a different idea this time around that was sort of successful. My new idea was to cut the foam board so that it would fit between the grooves on the insulator. I chose this over making a seal with clay because the grooves are fairly narrow, and I felt that my fingers would have been too big to effectively smooth out the clay between those grooves. I made a few errors while carving out the foam board, but eventually got everything to fit properly. Now that I have the foam board fitting properly, I glued it into place with hot glue along the backside of the board. I used the hot glue to very thoroughly fill in any gaps between the foam board and the insulator. Silicone is very sneaky, and if I'm not careful, it will leak out of a pinhole if I let it. With the divider glued into place, I cut some panels to finish up the box around the insulator. I used a little bit of clay to do the best that I could to patch the crack, as well as to plug up the mounting holes that are in the base of the insulator. I glued some cap nuts to the divider board. When removed, the impressions that they leave behind in the silicone will act as registration points for when I'm making castings with this mold. Normally I would press registration points into a clay divider, but since I don't have that option this time, I have to add something to the surface of the divider that will do the same job. I've seen other mold making videos use this method, so I figured I'd give it a try. When spraying the release agent on the foam board, I realized that I forgot to plug up the hole at the top of the insulator. If I hadn't filled it with clay, the silicone would have flooded the inside of the insulator, and 1, it would have been a waste of silicone, and 2, it probably would have messed up my mold. Good thing that didn't happen. This is partly what I meant when I said that the method that I used to build the box was sort of successful. The gaps between the foam board and the insulator were filled with silicone, which means that I have a lot of cleanup to do by cutting them off. If I had used clay, the edges near the insulator would have been less messy and just needed a good scrubbing with a toothbrush. Next, I built a new box around this half of the silicone mold and did my best to seal it so that no silicone would leak out. The silicone for this project was mixed while making another project, which is why I'm not showing it being mixed. The first 2 pours were mixed while I was making something for an upcoming video where I make castings for my pie splat molds. Now to see how my mold turned out. Well, that looks good. How about the other half? So it's about now that I realized that there was a problem. For some reason, the silicone stuck to the insulator. I mean, like fused to it really good. I don't know why or how this happened. I've always been told that silicone doesn't bond to stuff, so this one is a bit of a mystery to me. This half of the mold came out fine and is completely usable. However, this half has a bunch of defects and holes in it from all the pieces that got ripped out from being stuck to the insulator. After the failure of one half of the mold not coming out right, I put it aside for a bit and eventually came up with a way that might salvage at least the good half of my mold. I decided that I was going to build a box around the good side of my mold and use a second insulator that I had to try to pour a new half of the mold. Everything fits very snugly. Hopefully no silicone sneaks its way around to the other side of the insulator and messes up the good half of my mold. This goes for the previous 2 pours that I did, but I start, as always, by pouring a thin layer of silicone over the mold subject and allowing it to stretch across the surface of what I'm molding. This will give the final mold a nice smooth, bubble-free surface. This silicone was mixed while I was making a special project that I'm working on for the month of October. Suffice to say, I was very relieved when this half of the mold came out good and didn't get fused to the insulator again. Next, I made a lid for my mold box. The lid also clamps the 2 halves of the mold together during casting. I added some white pigment to the resin to try to approximate the original color of the insulator. I filled my pressure pot up to 60 psi and left it overnight to fully cure. Nice. Considering all the trouble that I had finishing this project, it came out pretty good. At the time of recording this video, I don't own a lathe, so I stuffed a tightly fitting dowel into the hole that I just made, and I used some sandpaper to try to clean up the seams. I ended up having to use my Dremel to clean up some of the stubborn bits that wouldn't get knocked down with the sandpaper. After a few coats of white primer and a few coats of high gloss paint, here they are. All in all, this project turned out not that bad. Due to the issues that I had, the mold makes slightly deformed castings. However, I would feel completely comfortable using this particular prop at a distance where the guests couldn't get a close-up look at it. The seam on one side is a bit rough and doesn't line up properly. Just like a Christmas tree, I could turn the bad side to the wall and no one would notice. I also made a couple of castings with a 2-part soft expansion foam. I cast the one on the left without back pressure, and the one on the right with back pressure. The one on the right side is much more sturdy than the one on the left side. I made castings with the soft expansion foam because they possibly could come in handy for a steampunk or maybe a Dr. Frankenstein's monster costume. The soft foam insulators are lightweight, which would keep the weight of a costume down, and since they're flexible, I wouldn't have to worry about anyone getting injured by it. All things considered, the mold turned out alright. However, I'm going to have to do further testing to get better castings out of this mold. I may do a follow-up video in the future to show whether or not I was able to figure things out. As usual, thanks for watching.